Hello and happy World Tourism Day. Welcome to the opening session of our climate-friendly travel summer school. We're very excited to explore this journey together for the next 5 days. I'm Jeff Lippman. I'm the president of SUNx Malta, Strong Universal Network, a legacy program carrying the torch lit half a century ago by Maurice Strong, climate activist and sustainability campaigner. SUNx Malta is an EU-based NGO partnered with the government of Malta, a long-standing climate and tourism leader. This summer school has 3 goals. First, to advance our concept of climate-friendly travel, low-carbon, SDG-linked, Paris 1.5 trajectory. It's a concept which applies for companies, for communities, for citizens, for consumers. And we also want to encourage an immediate change for resilient travel and tourism, because the climate crisis is not simply about fixing things for 2050. It's happening now, it's intensifying, the weather is becoming more extreme, and we have to start to act now. We have to go further, we have to go faster. Secondly, we want to engage with young people like yourselves around the world to help you fulfill your destiny with hope and ambition as tomorrow's leaders of a better future. And we want to make sure now that that future is going to be better. Third, we want to help to achieve SUNx's vision to have 100,000 strong climate champions around the globe by 2030, working in every UN member state to help travel and tourism play its role in the essential transformation to a low energy, high conservation society. At the end of this course, you will hopefully have a good knowledge of climate-friendly travel and why we believe, as UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said, it should be the only post-pandemic tourism. You will also be better equipped for a purposeful role as a strong climate champion, helping companies and communities transform to the new climate economy. This will increase your opportunities for getting a good job in the future. So let's start with the boring technical stuff. It's on the slide on the screen. Most important is to keep the Zoom link open during the break. And I want to start us off by introducing my good friend Leslie Bella, Chief Strategic Officer at Maltese Tourism Authority, Chairman of the Board of SUNx, and our lead partner, to say a few words about Malta's engagement and why it considers this to be an important initiative.
Malta, whilst also being the chairman of SUNx Malta, the organization that we have set up with our respected friend Jeffrey Lippman in order to push the concept of climate-friendly travel as a global initiative and a global challenge in response to the grave threats posed by climate change to countries worldwide. You may be asking, why has Malta taken such a step and such an initiative in hosting SUNx and working so closely with Jeffrey Lippman in this initiative? And the reason behind this is that Malta, in spite of being a very small state within the stage of global affairs, has historically, since independence, always taken active roles in events and initiatives of a global dimension. I would like to mention the fact that Malta, way back in the 1960s, spearheaded the process which eventually led to the international law of the sea, which recognized the sea as the common heritage of mankind. And in 1987 was the first country to place climate change on the agenda of the UN General Assembly, asking the UN and convincing the UN to look at climate change as an event of global significance, which needs to be followed, monitored and studied, so that we recognize as a species and as a planet its importance and its threat to the planet. So basically, besides these interests, we are also a vulnerable small island state with an exposed coastline, a huge dependence on tourism, most of which is coastal in nature. Most of our settlements are also on the coast, so sea level rise and extreme weather events as a result of climate change also pose threats to our continued well-being as a society and as an economy. We have recently been working on our tourism strategy to 2030, and I am pleased to say that this strategy integrates climate-friendly travel as a very important pillar of our strategic direction. We recognize the fact that climate change is something very imminent, and we need to integrate climate-friendly travel strategies into our strategic direction in recognition of the threats which are posed. We have also taken other actions in this regard as a country and as a destination through our support of SUNx and working closely with Jeffrey and his associates. And two things I would like to make particular reference to is our action that we have taken in the form of the Climate Friendly Travel Registry, in which companies and territories and organizations submit their climate friendly travel objectives and ambitions. And also we hold annual think tanks, bringing together experts to come up with the latest knowledge and latest information on progress in the climate-friendly travel spectrum, whilst also looking at future generations by providing education opportunities through the unique and first climate-friendly travel diploma, which we at SUNx Malta are holding jointly with the Institute for Tourism Studies in Malta. I augure you the best of luck for this conference, the first of many, and I hope that you keep working with us in terms of this noble ideal with a view to making climate-friendly travel cross the border from something that we wish to achieve into something which becomes reality and part of normal travel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. Now let me just give you here a flavour of our decade strategy to help deliver on climate-friendly travel. And I want to play a video which was created by one of the students, Angela Rodriguez, currently on our climate-friendly travel diploma. this opening session, I'd like to ask Ariana Stephen from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, a very, very important focal point of climate change activity, to say some words of welcome. Ariana is another of the great students on SUNx Malta's 2 years climate-friendly travel diploma course that we are conducting with the Institute of Tourism Studies in Malta. And just so you'll notice, the next entry is in the beginning of 2022. The course will start in February.
The youth of today are the leaders, the policymakers, and the entrepreneurs of tomorrow. It is crucial for them to become involved in decision making and to raise ambitions of governments in their countries to comment on how they can tackle climate change. Now more than ever, young people are much more connected. As we've seen over the past few years, social media also plays a critical function in raising awareness on varying issues. It keeps us connected. Youth are some of the main users of social media, and we can use this tool to further climate-friendly travel. Youth are also everywhere. When we officially launched the summit, young people from every corner of the globe started to register. This is the summit for the Americas. However, we have a summit taking place in the Asia-Pacific region and another that will take place in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. The fact that we have youth in every part of the world presents us with the opportunity to convey this message to every country. We are also very innovative. Youth can bring so much to the table if given the chance. Particularly, now we can see more young people becoming entrepreneurs, starting and joining NGOs, and looking for practical solutions and becoming the present-day problem solvers in their communities. Therefore, we chose to focus on youth for climate-friendly travel because children might be the future, but the youth are the present. We are young global citizens with one goal in mind: to create a better future. Climate change is an existential threat, and the Strong Earth Youth Summit hopes to provide a platform for youth in the travel and tourism industry to share ideas, network, learn and engage with some of the pioneers in this field who have decades of first-hand experience and knowledge that they can impart with us today and every year from today. We as youth need to harvest this knowledge and utilize it to promote climate-friendly travel. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.
Now let's move into the substance and start by looking at the core framework for creating what former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called the future we want. This framework has been evolving for half a century, from the 1972 UN Stockholm Environment Summit through the 1992 Rio Earth Summit with its Agenda 21 outcome, an agenda for the 21st century. It has been negotiated by almost 200 states in the UN and is today articulated in the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and the Paris Climate Agreement. Both of these defining events were organized by the inspiration for SUNx Malta, the remarkable Maurice Strong, who was also the co-founder of the Earth Charter, designed as a contract between people and the planet and launched with Mikhail Gorbachev, the former president of the USSR, and designed as a contract between people and the planet. We'll talk more about this amazing initiative later in the week, and everyone who completes this summer school will receive a copy of the Charter, signed by Maurice's widow, Hannah Strong. But now let's turn to someone who knew Maurice very well, my friend and co-founder of SUNx, Felix Dodds, also a co-author with Maurice of the book, Only One Earth.
Maurice Strong was born in Oak Lake, a small town in rural Manitoba in April 1929. just before the onset of the Great Depression, which was one of the most profoundly shaping forces of his life. I always thought that Morris was a unique individual, someone who cared deeply about the people, and particularly those who were more vulnerable than others. But in his life, he gained such a unique perspective. He had worked as an oil and businessman in Canada, the United States, and Kenya. He helped establish many non-government organizations and sat on the boards of many other NGOs. He'd interned at the UN as a 17-year-old in the PASS office and helped UN security. He came back at 32 as the UN Under-Secretary General for the first UN conference on the environment held in Stockholm in 1972. The outcome document was shepherded by Morris, was the first UN negotiated text which mentions climate change. Morris was ahead of his time in so many areas, climate change being one of the most obvious and relevant to today's conference. An outcome from the 1972 conference was the establishment of the United Nations Environment Programme, of which he would become the first executive director. In 1990, he was asked by the Secretary General of the UN to be the head of the Rio Earth Summit, which would happen 20 years after the Stockholm conference. In his career, he would eventually be appointed by different Secretary Generals 7 times to the post of Under Secretary General. I wanted to focus on one of his greatest achievements, and that was the shepherding of the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. The core text, Agenda 21, a 40-chapter blueprint for how to approach the 21st century. It covered social, economic, and environmental sections, as well as for the first time recognizing 9 stakeholders in society. This included industry and non-government organizations, but it also gave a unique space for young people, for indigenous peoples, and for women. The idea of stakeholder has had a huge impact as a concept, whether it's in the international negotiating processes, or it's at the national level, or at the local, or at the community level. The idea of stakeholders can be traced back to Agenda 21 and to Morris Strong. The second main outcome was meant to be an Earth Charter, but that didn't happen. But still a very important document was negotiated, the Rio Declaration. 27 principles, such as the polluter pays principle, the principle of prior informed consent, the right to development, common but differentiated responsibility, have found their way into international treaties and also into national law. So played a really important role in the last 30 years or 20 years. The third and the fourth outcomes were the 2 conventions on biological diversity and climate change, both of which have had vital summits this year. The biodiversity will be in October, the climate in November. What many people do not realize is that in addition to those 2 conventions agreed at Rio, within 2 years, a 3rd convention on desertification was agreed. And with the additional push from Rio, the conservation and management of straddling fish stocks and highly migratory fish stocks was agreed within 3 years of that Rio summit. Finally, the chemicals chapter of Agenda 21 started a process that culminated in the negotiating of 2 additional conventions, one on persistent organic pollutants and the other prior informed consent procedure for hazardous chemicals and pesticides in international trade. 6 new international regulations came out of the Rio conference, a huge impact. Last week's Biden climate summit was very important. Morris recognized that the economy and business are not separate from the environment. He would have been very happy, not just with the increased national contributions by the United States and other countries, but the emergence of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. 160 firms together responsible for assets in excess of 70 trillion. The market is changing and it's lining up to address climate change and help us deliver the Sustainable Development goals. And this will have huge impacts as we move forward. Finally, I had the pleasure of working on what would be Maurice's final contribution to a book, Only One Earth, which takes the reader from the 1960s to the Rio +20 summit in 2012. Underlying this book and the work of Maurice and his unique network of stakeholders is the recognition that thinking globally and acting locally isn't enough. We need to think and act at all levels and in all aspects of our lives if we are going to live sustainably on this only one earth. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Felix. And now to give a perspective on Maurice Strong, the diplomat, many times Under Secretary General of the UN, I want to turn to one of his successors as Executive Director of UNEP, the UN Environment Programme, and now head of the UNDP. Under Secretary General Achim Steiner delivered a very moving eulogy at the start of the Paris Agreement talks in 2015, noting Maurice's long-standing contribution to the very essence of the talks themselves. Imagine thousands of delegates listening to what you're about to hear now.
Maurice was a friend and mentor to many of us. He was also a true leader and trailblazer for the environment. Indeed, Maurice's work gave birth to a brand new era of international environmental diplomacy and governance at the 1972 Stockholm Conference, which saw the birth of the United Nations Environment Programme. It was the first UN agency to be headquartered in a developing country, and it was Maurice who built up UNEP from the ground with its headquarters in Nairobi on what was then a very simple coffee farm on the outskirts of the capital city of Kenya. Maurice convened the first ever international expert group meeting on climate change, a clear demonstration of how he was way ahead of the curve. He shepherded in a range of vital global environmental governance processes from the original Rio Earth Summit, Agenda 21 and the Rio Declaration to the launch of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity. Crucially, Maurice ensured the full participation of developing countries in these processes that included listening closely to those who were feeling marginalized, as well as indigenous people and those who were the poor in the world. He was also a champion of nature-based solutions. He always saw the human species as part of the greater natural whole. He always identified the incredible capacity of nature to provide answers that even the most sophisticated technology and science still cannot match to this day. It is also very welcome to see that leaders of the travel and tourism industry are getting behind the SUNx initiative and are committing to climate-friendly travel, helping us to meet our climate goals. This is a step that I believe Maurice Strong would have welcomed. Maurice will be forever remembered for placing the environment on top of the international agenda at the heart of development, with people and the planet being an integral part of that agenda. His courage, his entrepreneurship, his brilliance will continue to inspire me personally, and I know many generations to come. It is on his legacy that many of us are building today, with the hope that we can address the great challenges of the 21st century with the pioneering work that he was so much part of. To all of you and to all of us, thank you for being part of this continuing effort. At the 2014 UN General Assembly, Maurice Strong called on world leaders to rise to their historic responsibility as custodians of the planet, and I quote, to take decisions that will unite rich and poor, north, south, east and west in a new global partnership to ensure our common future.
And finally in this session, I want to play you a BBC interview from 1972 that to me epitomizes Maurice and what he stood for. How he started half a century ago has mushroomed exponentially into a global climate and sustainability change movement.
It became apparent that today man's own activities have reached the scale where they are the principal determinants of his own future. For example, we are now today effecting more changes in the composition of the atmosphere, in the composition of the waters of the world, and even the composition of certain elements in our food chain. We're making more of these changes in one generation than have been made in millions of years of human evolution. We don't know exactly what will be the ultimate impact of these changes, but we do know that many of them are irreversible, and many of them could be decisive in their effects on man's future. This question is not a matter of one man or one group of people's predictions. It's a matter of the fact that an increasing number of very serious-minded scientists have produced evidence from a whole series of events, many of them the well-known pollution or environmental problems that have come to our attention, that the natural world in which man lives and on which he depends is indeed deteriorating, is being destroyed in many instances at a rate that is accelerating, and that can only continue to accelerate unless we begin to control the activities that are having this destructive impact. Now, whether we are pessimistic or optimistic depends really on what we think about the nature of man. Whether we really believe that man, in light of this evidence, is going to be wise enough and enlightened enough to subject himself to this kind of discipline and control. We can avoid it, I think, first of all, by doing what we're now doing, and that is discussing it, understanding that the problem does exist, that the possibility does exist, and in the actions which I believe still are open to us if we take those actions in time. I'm persuaded that the future of man is going to be decided very much by the decisions taken in this generation.
Dr. Strong, there is a cynical view that any United Nations conference must be a talking shop at which a lot is said and very little is done. How do you answer that?
Well, I can only say that I understand that cynicism. It was one of the things that I had to consider when I took on this responsibility. But it is true. Rhetoric and very little follow-up. And right from the beginning, however, we have been determined, because the fact that action in this field is absolutely indispensable to man's future, that governments at Stockholm would be given the maximum opportunity to take decisions which will lead to action. Now, equally, however, I believe that the nations of the world themselves are impressed with the evidence that we have amassed that suggests that we must adopt a much more cooperative attitude towards our dealing with this problem, that Stockholm must usher in a new era of international cooperation. And I believe that this will be the dominant motivation. I have to hope that. Governments have had a long time to prepare themselves. They've been deeply involved in the preparations. They have before them a series of concrete proposals, which they have had now in their hands for about 3 months. Certainly ample time to consider them. There is no basis for avoiding these decisions at Stockholm. And I believe that the governments will go to Stockholm with an overriding sense of the importance of achieving consensus on at least a large percentage of these proposals.
Well, that brings session 1 to a close. During our 15-minute break, and every day this week when we do the same thing, we want to introduce you to Dodo, a fun cartoon series we're promoting for schools with our SDG 17 partner, Earth Focus Foundation, and its dedicated driver, Nicola Fury. There are 65 made-for-TV cartoons with teacher support for each, and young kids 5 to 10 love them. Please don't log off from Zoom and do come back after the break.
Dodo, come back. I can Dodo do this. Dodo, come back. I can Dodo do that. Dodo, come back. But I wanna see what you can do. Dodo, come back.
I say, look who it is, the king of ecology. How are you doing, dear boy? When I think it was me who gave you your first lesson in ecology. I don't want to hear about ecology ever again. No? Am I dreaming? What's wrong? My fiance's gone off with an ecologist to be a supermodel in Switzerland. Oh, the chicken. Come on, old chap, there's no need to make a mountain out of a molehill. An iceberg. Pardon? Look, over there, there's an iceberg.
Land! What are you shout about, Bart? Yuri, over there, land! Oh, I hope it still works.
It looks like there are people on it. Yo, gimme. Let's have a look. Yo. Ah! Go! Oh. Exploding binoculars, that's not nice. No, you idiot. They're firing a distress signal. I'm going to take a closer look. Take me with you. Ready? Just as I thought. Take us down.
Fire! You idiot, you've killed something. Oh, if no one saw us, at least we got lunch.
Hoi, castaways. Don't you know it's against the law to shoot pelicans? And it's the same with dodos, too.
Dodo?
My beak's totally frozen. Bart!
Holy smoke! Dodo!
Yuri!
Fantastic!
What are you doing here?
Nice to see you again.
I say, can someone tell me what's going on here?
Oh, it's dead simple. We were doing our research at the North Pole when our ice floe broke away from the rest. And started to drift. It all happened because of global warming.
Global warming? I could do with some of that.
It's a common phenomenon. You've heard of greenhouse effect?
An astronaut explained it to me.
So you know that the discharge of gases into the atmosphere prevents the Earth from cooling down. Trouble is, the less it cools, the warmer it gets.
Oh, that figures.
You can blame mankind. There are more and more people wanting better and better standard of living. So, more and more fridge, more heating, more air conditioning, more car. In the 40s, they reckoned there were 50 million cars on the whole planet. Now there are 400 million, and they're all emitting the gases that cause greenhouse effect. For example, take the oceans. The sheer volume of water is very slow to change temperature and acts as the brake on global warming. But as the temperature does rise, that brake becomes less efficient. If it go on like this, it's estimated that temperature will climb 2 or 3 degrees in 21st century. The effect on agriculture would be fantastically disastrous. Entire fertile regions would become deserts. The major grain-producing areas which feed the majority of mankind would be wiped out. But the worst thing about global warming is already happening. The polar ice cap are melting. Already, whole chunk of ice break off. If it get any worse, the sea level will rise 20 feet within a century, which would submerge vast areas of coastline and destroy many of the world's great harbour cities.
I don't believe it. I must do something about it.
Well, the first thing you can do is take us back to land.
That, I think I can do.
Hey, fantastic. I think there's brains in there. Yeah, this bird deserves Nobel Prize.
I can do this. Do, come back.
you don't mind. Ah, I can breathe.
But who are you?
The last dodo in the world. If I'd have stayed outside there a second longer, I'd have joined my ancestors.
If you say so.
Does this happen often, this demonstration?
Twice a day, 5 days a week.
People are crazy to demonstrate like this. It's dirty, it smells, and it makes them ill.
They're not demonstrating, they're going home from work. It's like this in every town in the world. You see, towns have become the main places where people live. Brick, concrete and asphalt replace trees, land and rocks. But towns are monsters which need amazing amounts of water, power and natural resources. In return, towns produce an unbelievable volume of rubbish, and that's the problem.
I see.
Towns have to feed, clean, heat, shelter and transport their inhabitants. That's why we need sewage plants, filter stations, electricity stations, heating systems, incinerators and millions of vehicles. All sources of pollution. If the wind blows, that's fine, but when it stops and the weather is hot, all this polluted air is stuck in the atmosphere above the towns. Eyes sting, breathing becomes difficult, and old people and kids are the first to fall ill.
That's terrible. We have to do something about it.
Oh, not so easy. Some towns suffer more because of their location. Only common sense can improve life in towns. We can limit the rate of toxic emissions. We can force car manufacturers to install catalytic converters. We can encourage public transport, which would reduce the number of private cars. Or, like in Rome, we can close town centres to traffic. It's all a matter of choice. Towns allow humanity to progress, but if nothing's done, they will be the cause of humanity's decline, and that would be a pity.
Ah, it's moving. Well, thanks for explaining all that to me, and for the oxygen. Oh, and by the way, why don't people travel four to a car? I can only see one person in each of these.
That's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that.
Well, next time, don't hesitate to ask. At last, the airport. Oh, took a bit of finding. Anybody there? What time's the next plane to Mauritius?
A big chicken!
I'm out of here! I'm out of here! Oh, no!
Up to. Let's go, you guys. T-minus 30, crew to embarkation.
This plane better be going to Mauritius. I wonder what they're carrying in there. Worms. Must be a fishing club.
3, 2, 1. We have ignition.
Oh, what's going on?
Roger, Houston, we copy. Nick, Dick, bring me the greenhouse effect instruments. Let's go, guys. Roger, Houston, payload launch T-minus 5. We're over the Indian Ocean. I can see Mauritius.
Mauritius? That's my stop!
Roger, Houston, request clarification of the function of the turkey stowed with the greenhouse effect instruments. Negative, I have not been drinking. No kidding, Jimmy. We really do have a turkey on board. Alive. It's talking. Catch him, guys. Let's go. Let's go.
Go! Let me off here. I want to make a complaint. This flight is not a proper flight.
Sir. This thing, I think it's a dodo. No. You're right. What are you doing
I'm going home!
In a
I'm
greenhouse
going home.
effect spotter?
FX Potter. Oh, that's your name then, is it, eh?
No, it's a side effect of pollution.
Pollution? I'm interested in that.
You're one weird bird. That pretty blue balloon, that's the Earth. Among the elements which allowed life to appear are air, light, and heat. The air forms the atmospheric layers which surround the Earth. The light and the heat come from the sun. The sun's rays pass through the atmosphere, which works like a filter. Then they reach and warm the Earth.
Oh yes, I know about sunbathing.
The Earth absorbs the heat and reflects it back to the sky. This radiation, which is less powerful than the sun's, finds it harder to penetrate the atmospheric layers. So long as the Earth sends back as much heat as it receives, temperatures stay stable. But if atmospheric conditions change, this balance is altered. The atmosphere retains the emission from the Earth, the heat doesn't go away any longer, and temperatures increase. Are you with me?
Well, more or less.
We call this the greenhouse effect, because greenhouses work in exactly the same way. The constant search for a balance between the heat outside and inside increases the inside temperature and allows summer crops to grow in winter. Now you understand why the permeability of the atmosphere for the Earth's radiation is just as important as the transparency of greenhouses. And do you know what determines this permeability?
Well, not as such.
Gases which are in the atmosphere. Carbon monoxide, methane, ozone, the CFC aerosols. The more there are, the more difficult it is for the heat to evaporate. That's why when industry increases the gases spreading in the air, it also increases the greenhouse effect and causes what we call global warming.
It's still beautiful, the Earth, from here. She'll be ashamed to destroy it.
A dodo in my space shuttle, who'd have thunk it?
Yes, quite a dodo. You're honoured, we're rarer than Martians. Now can you let me off at Mauritius?
No can do.
Okay, take me back where I got on. I can't waste time swanning around the cosmos. Come on, guys, let's go! If I ever get out of here, I swear I'll never eat the vanilla ice cream again. Or icing sugar. Ow! What's this? A freezing cold wall. What? Oh, a house of ice cubes. A local tradition. At least I'm out of the wind. This'll keep me warm. Slept like a baby. Things are looking up. Yeah, I know. Better get something inside you. But where's the scoff around here? Mister. Nice bear.
Not move.
Sorry, I can't bear people killing animals, being a vanished species myself.
You crazy? Fine specimen.
You eat bears? How unbearable.
Bear vanished too. Good to eat, many calories.
Oh, look over there. Let's go. Giddy up. Giddy up.
Eat what find. No eat bear, eat big fat lippy chicken.
Oh, look over there. Let's go. Giddy up. Giddy up.
Gia, no comprendo. Try mash.
Mush? Okay. Mush. Mush. Balloons. Someone's having a birthday party. If we hurry, we might get there in time for cake. Yummy. Come on. Mush. 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 Hey, what's going on? Why no more mush?
2 hours on, half hour off. Union rules, mate. Sorry, no can do.
Half an hour? But they'll finish the cake by then.
Not our problem, John.
Okay, I'll sort it out, as usual. There. Work of art. All aboard, lads. It works. I'm a genius. Hey, wait for me!
Nearly there.
Hey!
Hey, did you hear something?
Get out of the way!
What was that?
One's initial impression was of Dodo and a dog team on board a wind sled.
It's the dodo, all right. Fantastic.
At last, someone who recognises me. Is there any cake left?
Cake?
The balloons. Isn't it someone's birthday?
Not at all. They're to study the ozone layer.
The what layer?
Haven't you heard about the hole in the ozone layer?
No.
Ozone is a pale blue gas with a strong smell that has a bad effect on humans. It is found in the atmosphere, but the major part of it is concentrated in the center of the stratosphere, at an altitude of between 12 and 18 miles from the Earth's surface. It's what we call the ozone layer.
All right, now I know.
The ozone layer is fantastically useful. It's a bit like a shield or dark sunglasses for the Earth. It prevents the sun's ultraviolet rays from reaching us because these radiations are extremely dangerous. They reduce an organism's defenses and cause skin cancer.
They also damage ocean plant and plankton, which has a disastrous effect on underwater life.
Cheers for the ozone, then.
Every day, 300 million tons of this gas is created and decomposed. But scientists who've been observing it for 20 years have discovered that the ozone has reduced by 50%. What we call the hole in the ozone layer worries them enormously. Therefore, they've been working like mad to discover what's responsible for it. And they've come to the conclusion that it's CFC gas that we use in fridges, air conditioning equipment, and in aerosol sprays.
Today, industries still produce 770,000 tons of CFC a year, despite all the international agreement to limit its use. We know it takes 100 years for the Earth to remove CFC from the atmosphere, so it's urgent to ban the production of CFC. If we don't do that, the Earth will be naked and we'll all be subjected to these dangerous rays.
Well, it's not as much fun as a birthday party, but what you're doing is a whole lot more important for the future of the planet. But, hey, are you sure you don't have any cake?
We could probably find you some, but you'll have to tell us what you're doing here. A dodo at the pole. It's most unusual.
I must say, I don't feel at home here.
The dodo come back. I can dodo do this. The dodo come back. I can dodo do that. The dodo come back. But I wanna see what you can do. You know it's all I do. The dodo come back.
Welcome back. As we all know, 2015 was perhaps the pivotal defining year on the roadmap for a better future. The launch of the UN Sustainable Development Goals geared to 2030 and the Paris Climate Agreement with its 1.5 degree desired temperature increase cap and regularly increasing greenhouse gas reduction geared to 2050. This session focuses on the links between climate-friendly travel and the Sustainable Development Goals, what I always think of as the green pillar of the 2030 stage on that societal roadmap. And I want to make 5 broad points. 1, the SDGs derived out of the Millennium Development Goals, which dealt with poverty reduction in developing states. These ran from 2000 to 2015. They were broadly considered a success and are said to have lifted 1 billion people out of extreme poverty, earning less than $1 a day. Point 2, they were extended in the SDGs to cover every aspect of life on the planet for all states. Point 3, behind the 17 goals, there are 169 targets and 200 indicators. Every goal has a group of targets and indicators. And there are ongoing international, regional, and national programs with annual status reports for review, and progress is measured. 4th point, this is an incredibly comprehensive and incredibly complex program, as you can see on this slide, that cuts across all areas of national socioeconomic development, with action on any one goal interacting on many others. Point number 5, travel and tourism is deeply involved in many goals. In fact, UNWTO suggests it's involved in all of them. From the SUNx perspective, we believe every company and every community will be addressing differing combinations of SDGs relevant to their own unique circumstances. Two cities next to each other may have quite different points of focus. A hotel in a capital city like Nairobi or Harare or Paris will have little interest in the goal dealing with life underwater, but certainly a lot of interest in the goal dealing with water and sanitation. And this is a sort of mix and match set of activities which people will be able to align themselves with going forward for 10 years now into the future, and probably in some form or other carried on after that. In some countries, it's absolutely vital that travel and tourism is involved. We are there to provide support and guidance for community and company SDG plans and their climate plans through our registry, which helps people to measure and track how they're doing against the goals and to access a huge amount of data that we've collected that can help them make their plans, through our SDG 17 partners, companies, and in some cases international organizations, national organizations, who are working with us to help provide support for the plans, and last but not least, to our strong climate champions, who will be there to act as interns and virtual interns within companies and communities with a very specific knowledge in this area. Let's just look at 3 of the 17 SDGs. Goal number 1, poverty reduction. According to the World Travel and Tourism Council, WTTC, in 46 of the 49 least developed nations, nearly 95% of all those countries, tourism has become one of the primary source of economic development and of income. In most cases, the primary source. Moreover, in some countries, particularly small island states, this results in 25 upwards of GDP within the national economy. And of course, tourism is heavily involved, not just at the macro level, but at the micro level. Take a look at the incredible work that Fiona Jeffries has been doing to bring water to remote villages with her Just a Drop program, so that women and kids don't have to spend their whole life walking to distant wells, and so that the kids can get an education. So you can see easily how this activity cross-cuts with goal number 4 on good education and goal number 6 on clean water and sanitation. Or take goal number 5, gender equality. How much pressure there is from within and by the sector in equitable hiring and gender equal workplace practices, in corporate social responsibility programs, and in charitable projects and impact investment. Again, take a look at the Great Woman in Tourism program that my friend and former colleague Alexandra Alonso has been running for the past decade, giving a strength of purpose and a support system to give some equality as women break through the traditional glass ceiling. Or take goal number 8 of sustainable economic growth. In 2009, according to WTTC, the travel and tourism sector contributed 10.4% to global GDP. And that has been the case for 20 years or so, since I was putting those figures together as the first president of WTTC. There's not been much shift in the actual amount of contribution, except, for example, in 2020, when that share decreased to 5.5% due to ongoing restrictions in mobility as a result of the COVID crisis. So it's a very sensitive activity, and it's very important for governments that they are mindful of how to help to sustain tourism, not simply for the sector, important though that is, but for their own economic development during these crises. We are a very exposed sector. Take the job creation dimension. Some 300 to 400 million international tourism jobs. And add to that the many millions of jobs created from domestic tourism. In China, the domestic tourism is twice as big as all the global tourism. So you can see how many more jobs are involved when you throw that lot into the picture. Now let's get to the heart of the matter and look at Goal 13, climate action, with its 5 targets and 8 indicators. And in doing so, look at the second pillar of climate-friendly travel, the clean pillar. The climate-specific issues have been evolving with increasing intensity since that first Earth Summit in 1972. The 1992 Second Summit produced the first ever Global Climate Convention, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, as you'll hear it called during these days. Its secretariat, located in Berlin, organizes the annual Conference of the Parties, or COP sessions, with all of the attendant promotional and campaigning activity that has been built up around them. It was COP19 that delivered the Paris Agreement that called for a maximum increase in global temperatures of 2 degrees and ideally 1.5 degrees above industrialized norms. And now it's the 1.5 degrees that the scientists are telling us we simply have to focus on. Things are moving far too quickly to look at a 2-degree future. COP19 also called on all parties to submit NDCs, nationally determined contributions, laying out ambitions and intended ways of delivering on them. It's noteworthy that as of today, the total of NDCs will produce a 2050 result of between 3 and 4 degrees, with dramatic negative consequences for humanity, and a massive increase in extreme weather, in migration, in heat domes, in melting ice sheets, and in death. This system has been designed to create transparency and increasing collective pressure for improvement. The current focal point for this pressure is the race to zero, to achieve a peak in carbon emissions by 2030 and net carbon zero by 2050. At a tourism level, we have seen a variety of linked activities, historically driven by UNWTO. Its first declaration was in Jerba in 2003. The Davos Declaration process in 2007, in which I was directly involved, responsible for, now has the Glasgow Declaration of 2021, aligning with the race to zero. And we shall go into this in greater detail tomorrow. I would now like to move to the question and answer session. Remember to write your questions in the dedicated box. Now we're going to close.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Oh, hi, Ariana. To all those people who are out there, if you can hear me, we'd love to get some questions from you. And we hope you've found this first session today interesting. I see some old friends out there. Jeff from Myanmar, I'm pleased to see that you're here. And maybe you've got some searching question for us. Or maybe not. Well, I'm also glad to see that so many people commented positively on the Dodo cartoons. I'm a huge fan and have been working with Nicola Fury in Geneva on these for almost 20 years. But we truly haven't got any real traction. So anybody who's interested to work with us on getting these into your country, we would love to work with you.
Jeffrey, I see someone has their hand raised.
Absolutely.
Let me just
Can
allow them.
you give them the floor? Are you able to do that?
Yeah, I'm doing that now. You can go ahead, Cosmos. We're not hearing you in case you're asking a question.
Are you muted, Cosmos?
He's unmuted, but I'm not hearing his audio.
Ah.
You can drop the question in the chat if you'd like, because we're not hearing you. I have one from Ayu Molly, and this person is asking, how can the tourism sector practically help in mitigating climate change, especially those in developing countries who are still using high carbon content fuel for their travels?
I think it's very difficult for the tourism community to get ahead of the governments in practical aspects of the big change dimension. It's governments that have to commit to making radical changes, like not using fossil fuel for heating, using renewable energy. This is perhaps the biggest area. It's amazing to me to see that there are more subsidies around the world for fossil fuel extraction than there are for research into renewable energy. Much more money and subsidies are being spent on that. Governments are still are still investing in this, knowing that it's the very thing that's choking our civilization. I think the tourism industry can demonstrate against that. I know the tourism industry is not big into making demonstrations, but you look at how effective the young people have been with their demonstration on clearly bad and stupid issues. And I'm full of admiration for what Greta Thunberg was doing to focus people's attention on the pollution coming from aviation. So, and I think that's another area where the tourism industry can do something significant. Ultimately, they have to find, through the manufacturers and the engine manufacturers, a way to have flying take place without the use of traditional heavy fossil fuels. And probably a first step is to have everybody flying with sustainable aviation fuels, which cut out about 60, 70, 80% of the carbon, depending on the route. So I think it's now generally recognized that it's possible to create fossil fuel, to create sustainable aviation fuel. The technology is not difficult. The difficulty is that the oil producers don't see aviation anything like as big a market segment as motor cars. So they're claiming they're not prepared to put a lot of emphasis on that and saying it's a purely economic issue. But aviation is so critical. You mentioned developing countries. It's absolutely critical for developing countries. They don't have, you take Africa, you simply can't get between African countries for tourism or for business tourism, unless you fly. So we have to acknowledge that at a certain moment in time, between 2030 and 2050, it would be socially unacceptable to be using pollutant aviation fuel as we are at the present time. That's the acknowledgement. The second thing that has to happen is we have to find an alternative. Sustainable aviation fuel can meet that requirement. And then down the line, people like Airbus are talking about completely new propulsion using, for example, hydrogen and more aerodynamic airframes. For the short-haul flights, people are already experimenting with electric planes. And I think you're going to see an enormous boom in the electric plane market on short-haul flights. Other things the tourism industry can do, it can work with its customers to help its customers operate in a more climate-friendly way. It can give special promotions and special prizes and discounts and frequent flyer miles to people who are seeking that kind of service. Hotels can do lots of things to become more energy efficient, and they can move away from traditional oil and coal-based energy taken from the grid usually, and they can move to solar and wind energy. It's generally proven that the investment that you make in solar energy, for example, after 5 or 6 years, dependent on the regime and the government incentive, it pays for itself, and you start to have reduced energy costs after that length of time. So there are a wide variety of things that people can do. The most important thing, and I think this is one of the good things from the Glasgow Declaration, people commit themselves to a certain lifestyle. And if that lifestyle is, as we say, low carbon, that's a huge first step. And the whole point about SUNx Malta is we're trying to set up systems to help the travel and tourism industry to understand and identify what the challenges are. And then we're trying to show them best practice to see how they can respond to it. A typical idea that we're collecting best practice from around the world. If you're a hotel in Chile, it's absolutely likely that there are developments in France or in Germany or even in Kenya, which could be useful to you, but you wouldn't know about it. So we're trying to provide a kind of best practice information exchange. We're building a database so that companies, particularly small companies, the big chains, the big airlines, they can hire the best consultants in the world to tell them how to change and adapt their practices. But the millions of small businesses, they don't have that luxury. So part of our intention is to focus on those companies who need it probably the most, and to provide ways and means for them to get better information, better support, better help. Our strong climate champions will be there to help them.
Right, Jeffrey, I see. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Is it Nkopani? He has his hand raised. I'll ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
Hello, Godfrey.
Hi, Nkopani.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you? I'm very good, actually, because we've got a really good number of people who have attended today, and they like the dodo, so I'm feeling happy.
I'm all the way from Africa, but a country called Lesotho.
Yeah.
Yes. My question will rely on architecture. How can architecture impact tourism sector in order to become friendly in this climate, friendly tourism climate?
Architecture is critically important, Nkopani, because 30 or 40% of greenhouse gases are coming from buildings, and architects can redesign buildings. There's lots of talk about passive buildings, which are buildings which are specifically designed to be low carbon utilization. Architects can insist on there being renewable energy and solar panels on the roof of buildings. So I think architects have a really important role to play in helping, and particularly in city developments, because the architects and the town planners are the people who are building the changes into these areas. They're the kind of frontline movers. So I think, and most architects that I've observed, and we have a couple of very good ones who we work with, they're sensitive to this. They're looking for new technologies, they're looking for new materials, which when they put them in buildings, they make the buildings the most efficient. And one last point on this, in your part of the world, I think there's a lot in traditional architecture. I had a friend who lived in Jordan, and he was quite well positioned. He ran the airline, Royal Jordanian Airlines, and he built a house. His daughter was an architect, and she designed a house for him. I was there, and she started by saying, I'm going to dig out all of the soil for a swimming pool, and then I'm going to put the soil into the form of a building using the traditional building techniques. And it was quite amazing. It was like a building cast back 3,000 years. But the way she designed the windows and some skylights in the roof, she took absolute advantage of nature for heating and cooling and lighting inside that development. Now I know not people in Lesotho are unlikely to be saying, I think I'll have a swimming pool and build a house. I'm just using that as an example. I think traditional building designs that indigenous people had were often quite environmentally responsive to the location in which they were.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I would.
Ariana, are you there? We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I was just speaking while muted. I would like to go back to Cosmos and ask him to unmute in case he can ask his question again. Looks like he's not there, so I would move to Simon Hayes.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi, Simon. I was just writing you a note to say how good it is to have you with us.
Well, it's lovely to see you too, and I've really enjoyed this morning, so this afternoon, so thank you. So my short question for you, which is a slightly tricky one, is do you prefer the carrot or the stick? And specifically, what I mean about that in our area of tourism is I wonder how we can begin to properly value the right kind of tourism and give it a competitive advantage. So as you know, we work with eco lodges and small hotels and conservation projects in Latin America. And there's currently very little or no way to value their carbon sequestration and to value their role in preserving biodiversity. So what's your view on the carrot or the stick?
Well, I don't think it's an either or, to be honest with you. I think it's a both. I truly believe that the climate crisis is more severe than any of us really want to normally think about. I think if you listen to Guterres and you read the IPCC summary, which I have done, you know that we're way past some of those checkpoints that we're supposed to be at the moment. And once you've gone past them, it's very hard to pull it back. So I think you need two things, Simon, and I'll put it very simply because of people's languages. You need tough regulation to push people to do the right thing. Example, I would not probably, being very honest, deal with my recycling and rubbish at home in a developed country if there wasn't a rule that said, if you don't do it this way, you're going to get fined. And I think you're going to need that kind of activity. You need carbon taxes to push the price of carbon up so that people look for alternates. But at the same time, and I think you put your finger on it, I think what's missing are the kind of innovation funds for precisely the sort of things that you've talked about. Eco-lodges are small, medium activities, usually run by very, very committed people, and they're often running absolutely against this bottom line stuff. And then something like COVID comes along and they're totally screwed. And I think there's two ways these fundings could come. Obviously from government, I think there's a government responsibility. But Simon, I'm appalled by the fact that as an industry, we see this stuff coming up. Every year it's going to get slightly worse. We don't put any industry initiated funding in place that would help for the, it's the old story of Joseph and the coat of many colors. If you're going to have a famine every 7 years, put something a little bit away in the 6 good years so that when the 7 years comes along, you've got some food to eat. And I think as an industry, the big organizations, IATA, WTTC, UNWTO, when things get bad, the first thing they do is produce policy papers looking for how can we be the first ones to get the handouts. And I think the time to do, it's time to get the insurance companies in. They're making lots of money from travel and tourism, and to get the BlackRocks in and Jeff Bezos and say, set up a fund that would be accessible for small and medium enterprises who are committed to climate-friendly travel. I just think it's not on anybody's radar screen. I know when I was at WTTC, we didn't have an organization to begin with. We built it up over the 10 years I was there. It just wasn't anything that anybody talked about. And the same thing at UNWTO. But I do think those are the people who, it's their job to be innovative in this respect. What do you say to that, Simon? You're muted. You're muted.
There we go. I couldn't unmute myself. Obviously, they've heard
Ariana.
about me.
She's a very tough taskmaster.
Ariana's obviously heard that I can talk too much, Jeffrey.
Actually, we did tell her that.
No, that all sounds good, and you're quite right. We do need to plan forward, but also, there seems to be, to me, there's no market nudge towards the right kind of tourism. So I think we've got to do both, haven't we? We've got to, governments don't like necessarily the idea of carbon taxes, but we need both. We need carbon taxes for the wrong kind of travel and subsidies for the right kind. And the market has to try and get its head around these externalities, which are causing so many of our problems. They're not externalities: human happiness, environmental degradation, as well as carbon, and our economic system doesn't really recognize or value these things, and tourism is suffering as a result.
I agree with you. This evening I'm taking part in an event with Jürgen Steinmetz, who runs the World Tourism Network. We've been playing for years with an organization called ICTP that we've never quite known what to do with. It's always been trying to do green things. And we're going to change its name to the International Climate and Tourism Partners. And one of our very goals is to see if it isn't possible to create a market which involves consumers. So that if you get right-minded hotels or eco-lodges, to take your example, and they join for a tiny amount, I don't believe in charging people large amounts, enough to pay the bills at our end, and you give them direct bookings so they don't lose all of the money to the big booking engines, and you help them by getting consumers who are looking for that kind of experience to say, this is the kind of experience you're going to like, and to get the properties to say, look, if you come to our property and you book directly, so we make 20-30% more money from that, the first meal is on us, the first drink is on us. Create incentives, soft incentives of this kind, create a community, give people a sort of feeling of they're going to places that are run by the right people, and it's young people who have this ethos more than anybody. That's why I'm so pleased with this event that we're doing, because the young people are the ones who are really going to have to deal with this when it gets much, much worse. Greta Thunberg the other day said, we're the ones who will have to pick up your mess. And it's true. So I think there's a market potential, and we'd be really happy to talk to you, Simon. I know you work with a group of eco-lodges in Latin America, and it would be great to trial this thing with some of them. And it might get them, obviously, if they can get extra business, and that business is coming from people with the same ethos, it's a win-win situation.
All right, Jeffrey, we have some questions in the chat. So the first one is from Zam MVMT. Do you think that virtual reality traveling is one of the solutions of climate-friendly tourism?
Well, the short answer is yes. I think we're going to see more of virtual reality and its sister, augmented reality. I think the COVID situation is not going to go away so quickly. Everybody is sort of saying, well, it'll be a year. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure this variant idea. You know, we've seen the Delta variant. How do we know there are not more variants out there? People are not getting vaccinated as much as one would expect them to have done. So the famous herd immunity isn't emerging. And it's pretty clear that travel is right in the middle of this kind of situation. When you're traveling now, in addition to all of the other stuff you need about 4 or 5 documents to cover the health side. So I think this is going to be with us for quite a while. I do think virtual reality is going to become much more interesting as the technology improves and as the challenges to actual travel continue to be there. And just, I mean, I don't know how many people listening have seen this. I saw a quite brilliant Microsoft presentation the other day, and it was a lady speaking. And at some stage, she said, this is how good we have got virtual reality at Microsoft. And she held out her hand, and an identical small figure of herself appeared on her hand. And you could see these two figures were talking side by side. And then she said, watch this. And she flicked her hand, and the small figure came a big figure standing next to her. And you couldn't differentiate. And then she said, what's even more interesting is I'm speaking to you in English, and my colleague here is speaking Japanese with an instant translation of everything I say. Now, that kind of technology can make huge changes. And when you don't have to have it, this was just nobody was wearing headsets or these kind of, you know, Darth Vader masks that people have to wear to see virtual reality. So I think the best example I can give is some years back, I was in Davos. It was 1997, 1998. We had a small group of tourism people. We had a tourism community, and Bill Gates came to talk to us. And Bill Gates's first question, 1997, was, how many people here spend too much on telephone calls? And this was before you had a European system and the Commission taking action, and everybody put their hand up. And Bill Gates said, in 10 years' time, you will be having all those calls for free. And everybody laughed. People said it would be wonderful, but how the hell can you produce that for free? But look, we do this stuff for free now, and the technology is so much better than it was then, and it's getting better at an accelerating rate. So I'm fairly convinced that we're going to see more and more virtual reality. And I hope it goes back the other way, by the way. I've long felt that the countries in Africa or in Latin America, Simon, much of their history and culture is kind of stolen by the Disneys of this world. It's not stolen, but it's been acquired. It's a bit like zoos. And I think there's got to be some capacity for the reverse to happen. For if you're in Africa, or if you're in Chile or in Colombia, you could have some sort of virtual reality which is beamed to the people in the most developed countries, and you can take a fee for showing them your animals because they are your natural animals, for example, or your Mayan culture or something. And everybody has culture. You know, the Mayan culture is fantastic. You go to Abu Simbel in Egypt and it's equally fantastic. You go to Cambodia, to Angkor Wat, it's the same. And everybody has some of this. And I think you will be able to project that using technology in ways that it hasn't been done before very quickly into the future. How are we doing, Ariana?
Yeah, so we have another question from Erica. You're hearing me, right?
Yeah. Is that our Erica?
Yeah.
This is going to be a dangerous question.
If you had to give us 3 things tourists must do or look for to become climate-friendly travelers, what would that be?
I knew it would be a difficult question. I think one thing is companies or communities that have defined plans, which are transparent, which you can see what their plans are. For example, Amsterdam has set up a whole program around so-called donut economics, which are designed to keep you inside the planetary boundaries and inside on the sort of ethical boundaries and societal boundaries in the inside ring of a donut. And they're actually changing the whole way that Amsterdam approaches its lifestyle, and with it, its tourism as a consequence. So I think if you find people who are doing that sort of thing, and you're the kind of person who's looking for that kind of experience, you know, there's a win-win situation. Second thing, I'm becoming a big believer in high-speed trains. I think we're starting something in Brussels where I live. It's becoming a hub for what they call the night jet. And you can, instead of having to go through the whole airport experience, and, you know, I love airport people. I have a lot of friends who run airports, but you can't tell me that standing in long lines, and increasingly so with COVID kind of regulations, is a pleasant way to travel. And if you had a night train from, you can get on the train in Brussels in the evening at 5 o'clock, and you can be in Venice, and it's a sleeper experience. And it's not the same price as one of the low-cost carriers who are, you know, charging you nothing for flying, but it's a reasonable price. And I think night trains, high-speed trains, China has gone crazy on high-speed trains. And it's a huge country with a massive, massive movement of people, particularly domestic tourism, as I mentioned. And I've been on the Chinese high-speed trains. It's a terrific experience. And they're proven to be significantly less emitting than aircraft, and a much, much more cheerful experience. And Erica, could you ask the question and say which 2 things would you do? And then I'm off the hook.
Erica, did you hear that? So, Jeffrey, we move on to another question by Lillian. And Lillian is asking, okay, she said, Travel Life, we have done trainings by Travel Life, and we have joined the initiative as tourism companies. Sustainability in tourism. Do you think we have done enough to contribute to sustainability in tourism or not?
Well, I honestly can't answer that question because I don't know the specifics. And the truth of the matter is, whether you've done enough depends on the specifics. But the very fact that you're doing something of that kind is a very, very good and positive and important step in the right directions. There are many programs out there, certification programs, incentives, the big booking engines have got a green system together. And I think anything that you do to work through those kind of systems and to move in that direction is very, very good. I wanted to say something about carbon offsetting. because there's a huge controversy around, you know, some people say carbon offsetting is a bit like you say you're not going to smoke anymore, and then you pay somebody in a developing country to stop smoking so that you can smoke. But I'm actually persuaded that as an interim measure, before you get to no greenhouse gas, if you can find good carbon offsetting systems, this is a positive thing to be doing. And we've started a monthly bulletin called Exist. And we ran a couple of carbon offsetting people as the leads last week in this bulletin. And if anybody wants to subscribe, it's free, the bulletin, and you just send a message to us at the Sun program and we'll put you on the list. And both of those programs, one was called Trees for Travel, and it's a very simple way of planting trees as you travel. There are lots of those programs. This one is particularly easy to understand and to sign yourself up with. And the other one is called Tomorrow's Air, and that's done basically through the Adventure Travel Trade Association. And they work with a group in Switzerland called Climeworks, who have a mechanism for taking the carbon out of the air and sinking it deep into the rocks. And I think anything of that kind is a positive step. And certainly, if you have companies, to go back to Simon's earlier intervention, if you have companies who are holding themselves out and transparently, not just making a declaration, but actually setting out the steps that they're taking with their sustainability plans and their climate plans, I think it's important to give those companies support. I think that's a positive contribution, because it's you're doing something and somebody else is doing something, and one will make three in that circumstance.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I see Simon still has his hand raised. I'm not too sure if he wants to say something or
wants to go to the bathroom. It seems not.
Okay. So we'll move on to another question. So this is from Jeff, our Jeff. What do you think of the awareness of the statement of the countries on climate change and climate-friendly travel?
I'll be very honest with you, I don't think we've made much traction, but we haven't been doing this very long. We basically started publicly when we made the agreement with Malta, which was 2 years ago. We've started to put 3 measures in place. One is the registry, which we put in place, where companies and communities, particularly communities, can register their sustainability and their climate plans. The second one is this network of partnerships, SDG 17 partnerships, where we're acting as a kind of broker to get well-intentioned companies with companies and communities who need action in this area. And the last one is the Strong Climate Champions, which the guys on the course this year are all now enrolled in. And we believe that over time, if we build those out, we'll get a recognition on the part of companies that this is a positive thing. But at the moment, I don't think we've got traction, and it's partly our fault because we haven't sold the story as well as we might, and it's partly just because there's a sort of slow take-up. There's lots of nice words. It's easy to, as I say, I keep saying, you know, it's not the declaration is really important. It's good that we're having a declaration in Glasgow, but the real issue will be what happens afterwards with the plans and the programs. And I think as there's more of this is put into the public domain, I think more countries and communities will join a climate-friendly travel positioning. And our starting point, and you'll see this, those of you who attend our session this evening on ICTP, is we want to work with small and medium enterprises. We don't think we're going to convince the big players in WTTC that what we're saying as a small NGO is what they will want to do. But we think the small and medium enterprises have an appetite for this, but they don't necessarily have a way of delivering on it. And we want to work with developing states and small island states, because that's, again, where the need is. The big developed countries, they'll find their own way of doing this. You'll see this in Glasgow this year. You know, the British government will become the most climate responsive government in the world. Till the next COP is somewhere else, then that government will do the same thing, and the British will go back, I suspect, to sort of post-COP action.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I have another question from, well, I think this is the name of their phone, Latitude. How is climate-friendly travel impacting wildlife?
We haven't done anything in the wildlife field at the moment. It's, I believe it's a very important field. We're trying to do programs in Africa. We have quite a lot of members who've signed up from Africa, from Kenya, from Zimbabwe, from a couple of West African countries. And the one thing that Africa has in my mind is it is the wildlife capital of the world. And we've been talking through our friend Jürgen Steinmetz, the African Tourism Board, to see if we could have some sort of a program together to put climate-friendly travel and wildlife conservation together. And we did develop a project looking very much at the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and action there which intersected with the gorillas. But we never actually put it off the ground. It's something that we'd like to do in the future, because clearly wildlife is absolutely imperative to tourism in so many countries.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And we have another from Jeff again. He's asking, okay, so in this case, our climate champions will be taking an important role, won't we?
Yeah, I have great hope for the climate champions, and it's why we're doing this particular summer school. We would like everybody who's listening and joining and coming to our sessions to consider themselves as potential climate champions. And our thought is that if this is a successful summer school, we'll repeat it regionally next year and use this we'll do it at a very low cost. It won't be free because somebody has to pay the rent, but it won't be anything like a traditional course. It's more likely to be 50 euros. And we'll try and do this in 10 regions and every year, because if you want to get to 100,000 by 2030, you've got to think about doing this on a massive scale. And I think the climate champions can be so helpful to the communities and the companies who want to transform, but don't quite know how to do that. And that's what I think those of you who've been on the course this year, Erica and Pratishta, who are on this call at the moment, I think you can testify that we've had a really good interchanges on what are the right things that people should be doing. And we've had very good lectures from people who are doing the right thing.
Yes, and I have another question from Ayomali. Do we have social media group? Do we have a group, social media group, to join as climate champions? I can answer this. Yes, we have a Facebook group. I would link in the chats. It's climate friendly travel, and we usually share like information that we've come across that would aid our campaign on climate friendly travel. So I'll send a link in the group now.
I'm not leaving, I'm just letting my dog out.
In this. So Jeffrey, I have a really a comment from one of the people in the chat. I think you'd find interesting. So Lorraine Jenks says that carbon offsetting is like cooking a beef stew and adding some leaves of spinach and calling it vegetarian.
Yeah. I used to think something similar to that, but I concluded the following, Lorraine, and it's good to see you with us because I know you've been very active over the years. I think people are going to continue to use fossil fuel for a long time, not because it's a good thing, but because there aren't alternatives. And if those people, particularly in aviation, now you have the so-called CORSIA initiative, which has been shepherded through the International Civil Aviation Organization, it makes offsetting a critically important part of future air travel. And I come to the conclusion that it's better than doing nothing. If some people are planting trees, and it's a question of how, you know, the academics will say, what's the life cycle of the tree? What happens if there's a forest fire? Who knows what happens if the trees are felled? They're not collecting the, yes, and there's all of that. But generally, the idea of doing things which compensate can't be bad. And I'm kind of persuaded that it's the lesser of two evils. The other evil is doing bad things and doing nothing about it. And again, I mentioned, you know, my recent experience in this field, talking to offsetting companies, is they're as well intentioned as any business venture is. They're trying to do this not just to make money, most of them, but because they actually believe that they can have a kind of impact as well.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And we have another question that I missed earlier from Ayomali. How can the tourism sector practically help in mitigating climate change, especially those in developing countries who are still using high carbon content fuel for their travels?
Only time, I think. I mean, my observation about what's happening in developing countries is that most people are in much worse positions and much closer to the poverty line than people in developed countries. The fuel that they're using tends to come from high carbon emitting sources, coal powered if it's on a grid, or often the project that we looked at in the DRC, they were using the primary rainforest for heating and for cooking, and this was emitting an enormous amount of carbon. And I think the only thing is with time and substitution. My friend Hans Friedrich, who runs our climate friendly travel registry, was the Director General of an organization promoting bamboo. And he argues that you could replace a lot of the hardwood which is burnt in developing countries with bamboo pellets, and that would be much less impactful in terms of carbon emission. And one of our students actually built a fantastically interesting bread oven, which was operated in a very climate sensitive way. And I think that kind of innovation is also very good if you can get it. Cooking is a really important part of carbon promotion, and it's a place where you could make positive changes.
Thank you again, Jeffrey. And we have a question from Joshua. Yeah, Yunatanov. How can we go about getting a job in the tourism industry with climate change and environmental sustainability as the main focus?
Well, I mean, obviously our answer is that if you engage with us, with our courses, with the diploma, and I let diploma students here speak to that, and with the courses that we're putting in place, it will at least give you some sort of certificate that you can take to a future employer and say, look, I have this training in this field. And it's my view that more and more future employers are going to be looking for these kind of skill sets, because regulation is going to force them to make changes, and they will need people who can help them make those changes.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And from Patricia Reyes, hold on, just got knocked out of my view. This is a really important question. What are the measurable objectives from the summer's climate school, and also expectations from climate champions, for climate champions?
Oh, you know, I'm really bad at measurable results. I think the best measurement is, did you find it useful? Did you find it interesting? Was it better than watching Netflix or something instead? But we're not going to sort of send around questionnaires asking people to put scale on 1 to 10 what they thought about the way we've put this course together. And yeah, I mean, the main thing is you've got to say at the end of it, has this influenced my future thinking or future behavior in a direction that I feel good about? And I think that would probably be enough for me. I think, you know, the measurement's not going to help you as an individual, and we sure as hell aren't going to spend any time and effort in creating measurements for people who we'd like to go out of this course. And I mean, if you say one thing, a number of people have said, we thought the Dodo cartoon was great. And if you come out of this course saying, I watched this great cartoon, it was a lot of fun, that's terrific. That's a good measurement for me. If you come back tomorrow, that's a good measurement.
Indeed it is. And I got another question from Latitude. How can we be well sustainable in order to not do mistakes that will affect more in future of climate?
You're always going to do mistakes. I do mistakes every day. And my wife tells me I do many, many, many of them. I think the most important thing is to set yourself a direction that you personally think is the right way of life for the future. I think I'm believing in a certain direction, and at the end of the day, if I feel I've done something that moves positively in that direction, that's good enough. And then I talk to my daughter and she tells me I'm not doing enough and it's necessary. And she's right. And your generation and her generation will do more because you've been hopefully educated to do more. When I was a kid, there was no Earth Day in school. There was no Fridays for Future movement, no Greta Thunberg. And I think current generations of youth, to use the UN definition, they've all had an Earth Day since 1972, the first Earth Day. And you learn about these things as you're growing up. And I think you have a better vision for the most part than my generation had.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm going to ask Simon to unmute. I saw he left a lovely comment here for you. I don't know if he wants to read it out or further elaborate on that point.
I'm fearful to hear it, but go ahead, Simon.
Which one do you mean?
The first one.
No, well, I think a long time ago now, I was just saying how much I was enjoying this, and it's fascinating for me to be able to take a chunk out of my day to concentrate on this, because I think one of the big dangers, this is not what I wrote, by the way, Jeffrey, but I think one of the big dangers is that we look at all of these things, we give them great attention and concentration, and then we move on with the rest of our day and with the rest of our lives. So having a space to really concentrate on this is very important. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you, Jeffrey. It's always so good to see your face.
Thank you, Simon. It's always good to hear your comments. I have to say, I was thinking that I missed something out when I started that presentation. I said there are three things that we're trying to do, if you recall, right at the beginning. And one was to get a concept of climate-friendly travel, and another was to engage young people, and the third one I can't remember now. But I also thought I missed out. I wanted to get a message out about Maurice Strong and his commitment and vision, and I think you could probably get it as I do every time I watch that 1972 interview. He's just so articulate and decent. And decent's a word I'm using more and more in the post-Trump years. I'd like people at the end of it, when I'm pushing the daisies, I'd like people to say, well, he was a decent guy. He was okay, I think that, and in terms of measurement, if people have listened to this and participated and enjoyed it, I think that's a lot. That's as much as we could hope for.
I didn't know Maurice, Jeffrey, but I found that very moving as well. And I think we've got this whole problem of shifting baseline and many other things. And I do think getting some of the historical perspective and actually how long some people have been talking about this is very important as a call to action.
Well, he spotted it, as I say, he called it existential for the first time in 1972. And this is a man, by the way, who at the Rio Earth Summit, he had 124 heads of state attended. It was the biggest gathering of heads of state ever. And he had a table made with 124 seats. So every head of state got a seat at the table. And then he sent a message that said, nobody can speak for more than 5 minutes. And his biggest worry was when Fidel Castro stood up to speak, because I've actually was once listening to Castro years ago, and he spoke for 4 hours, and somebody told me that was one of his shorter speeches. And Fidel Castro apparently went to the platform, looked at Maurice Strong and put his hand up, and spoke very eloquently for 5 minutes. So, this is a man who's been able to change society in a massive way. Incredibly humble man. I spent a lot of time with him in his latter days in China, and he would take his dinner in a restaurant, and his delight was in the little Chinese children. He carried sweets in his pocket, and he gave the sweets to the children to see the smiles on their faces. People can change society, and I think Maurice in many respects did. How are we doing, Ariana? Are we outrunning our time?
No, we're doing just fine. I have one comment and in a sense question from Sukirti. Gosh, I'm so sorry about butchering your names. In a country like India, electric vehicles, well, are becoming very popular. But some groups of people think it's difficult to recycle the batteries of these electric vehicles. And it's worse than vehicles running on regular fuel. What are your thoughts on this?
I do know that battery recycling is a big challenge, but I also know that the value of moving away from fossil fuel to electric vehicles is massive. And I don't know what the relationship of one is to the other in measurable terms. I think people will find ways to recycle, particularly as everybody moves to electric vehicles. It's certainly clear in Europe that by 2035, 2040, you will not be able to have a petrol fueled car. It's going to have to be an electric vehicle. So I think technology will force new methods for recycling and for disposal of used batteries, or for recharging used batteries, or whatever it is. I think it's much more significant that we shift from petrol fuel, fossil fuel, to a clean energy system for cars, for aircraft. I think people who say, oh, you can't have a renewable energy, clean energy for aircraft, they're just burying their heads in the sand, because if they don't, then the aircraft won't be allowed to fly at a certain stage. That will concentrate the minds of the manufacturers and the engine manufacturers and the airlines like nothing has before. And I think it's where I find common ground with Greta Thunberg. I initially thought that the no flying Fliegstrag, or whatever it was called, that they talked about was a step too far. But the more I've looked at it, the more I think they were saying the right thing. Maybe there's a need for a time dimension that says, okay, airlines, you've got till 2030 to get your act together. You're massive companies, you're buying your fuel from the biggest, richest companies in the world. Your supply chain involves some of the biggest, richest countries in the world. Sit down and say, what are we going to do when in 2030 we can't pollute? That, I think, would be, the thing that concentrates people's mind. Again, another thing, I listened to a WTTC event last week in which the chairman of IAG talked about the hundreds of hotels they were going to build over the next 10 years. And all I could think of was, why do you have to build hundreds of hotels? Maybe you should build a few less, but make sure that they are completely pollutant free, and spend the money that you are going to spend on the other half on making sure that the half that you do are climate friendly. Now, that won't make me very popular with my friends at WTTC or IAG, but I think we have to stop thinking that exponential growth is the only direction we can move in. Do you think that's enough for today, Ariana?
Oh, I was speaking, I was on mute. Our very last question would be from Isaac, and he's asking, to what extent developing countries involved with the SDGs and Paris 1.5 Accord, and what big nations are doing to support them? What are big nations doing to support them?
Well, the short answer is not enough, but they're going to do more. In terms of the climate dimension, rather than the SDGs, the big countries committed to put $100 billion a year into a fund to help the developing countries respond to the need to change their economies to fit into a new climate economy framework to help meet Paris 1.5. And to date, they've only put in, I think, 80% of that funding. It's Mr. Johnson's intention at Glasgow to come and say, I've managed to put the other 20%, and we are getting to the 100 billion. But it's also, it's not just money, it's mentality as well. It's that same mentality that we've had around the vaccines. Is it okay for us to get all our citizens 100% vaccinated and for you guys to be at 1 or 2%? You know, there are arguments on both sides. You need to have as many people as possible vaccinated in your country. And at the end of the day, we live in a nationally determined world. But when travel comes in, if you've got pockets of people who are unvaccinated and who are potential carriers of a mutant which is worse than the Delta mutant, it's going to come back and hit your vaccinated people one way or another. On climate, we're all in the same boat. You can't create boundaries against pollution. And I'm minded of something that happened with me many years ago. There was another crisis. I guess it was a financial crisis. And I was working with UNWTO, and I was in China for World Tourism Day. And it was the China National Tourism Day. And I was there with the chairman of the Chinese National Tourism Association in a ceremony they were having. And we had a press conference together. And he said, China is going to keep encouraging its citizens to travel, because we know that when our citizens travel, they're an import for us, but they're an export for those countries we go to. And China wants to help our neighbors. And I'm a big fan of China. I think they've done, you know, remarkable things in adjusting to the climate crisis. They are the biggest polluter, but they're quietly taking action to change that over time. And I was really moved by the fact that this guy said, even though it's a cost to us, an import for our people to travel abroad in a crisis, financial crisis time, we're still going to encourage them to do it because that's helpful to them. And, you know, you can think what you like about China in geopolitics, but on that specific issue, I was really impressed that they had that breadth of vision that said, even if it's hurting us, it's going to help you. That's a big thing to say.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And I think we should conclude the Q&A now. So if you have anything else to say, you can say it now. I'm going to run the rest of.
No, I just want to thank people for joining us. This is the style that we're going to use for the balance of the week. We have some, you know, some of the speakers you've seen today are people who've spoken in the past. We've curated this activity because we think it's better than having a run of, you know, mediocre speakers with some good speakers and some bad speakers. And we've got some really, really good presentations coming up on climate tomorrow from Susanna Becken and from Daniel Scott, who are two of the world's experts on this field. And throughout the rest of the week, we're trying to sort of curate and choreograph this kind of an activity. So please join us, and it's good to see that so many people have stuck with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So I'm going to play the last part of our video.
Yes, we have one last little thing for you. If you can stay with us for another 5 minutes maximum, it's something that I think you'll like. Now we're going to close with a special tribute to Maurice Strong from Professor Arthur Dahl from our SDG 17 partner, ECPD, the European Centre for Peace and Development. They have generously agreed to join us as a partner in this summer school and to provide electronic copies of their book, Remembering Maurice F. Strong, to all who complete this course.
It is so important for your generation to learn about and remember Maurice Strong, one of the most remarkable figures of the last century for his impact on our care for the earth and learning to live sustainably. The Strong Earth Youth Summit is named in his memory. I am speaking on behalf of the European Centre for Peace and Development, one of the University for Peace institutions established by the United Nations. Peace and development were two of the principal concerns of Maurice Strong, to which he devoted his life. In particular, the president of the ECPD Council, Federico Mayor, who, as former Director General of UNESCO, worked closely with Maurice Strong, was a member of the Earth Charter International Commission, set up by Maurice after the Rio Earth Summit of 1992, to complete the Earth Charter, a declaration of the principles of our responsibility for the Earth, our home, which Maurice had not been able to obtain from governments at Rio. You all should study the Earth Charter, as it provides a valuable guide for the values and ethical principles that can help you throughout your life. My own life has also been devoted to the environment and sustainability, inspired in part by the example that Maurice set. I first saw Maurice Strong in action when I represented the Baha'i international community at the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm, Sweden, in 1972, which Maurice organized and was its Secretary General. It launched the International Environment Movement and created the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. 2 years later, when I became the Regional Ecological Advisor at the South Pacific Commission, I visited UNEP headquarters in Nairobi to establish communications between our two intergovernmental organizations. But Maurice, the first executive director of UNEP, was away at the time. So he came to see me in New Caledonia in December 1974. And we spent 3 days together planning how UNEP could help support environmental activities in the Pacific Islands. This led to my launching of the South Pacific Regional Environment Program in 1982 as one of UNEP's Regional Seas programs. Later, when I was Deputy Director of Oceans and Coastal Areas at UNEP, Maurice asked for my secondment to a secretariat for the 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development to help draft Agenda 21, the action plan from the Rio Earth Summit, and in particular, its chapter on oceans, coasts, and small islands. I last saw Maurice at the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, where, as perhaps the oldest person present, he made one of the most creative comments about employment and everyone benefiting from the world economy regardless of whether they could find a job. ECPD has published a wonderful book, Remembering Maurice Strong, full of recollections from many of those who worked with him, including your summit organizer, Jeffrey Lipman. And we are providing all of you with electronic copies so that you too can be inspired by Maurice's example and perhaps follow in his footsteps to make the world a more just and sustainable place for everyone.
Thank you, Arthur and ECPD. Thanks also to everyone who joined us today and to the SUNx Malta team, without whom we could not have put this together. Pratishta Parajuli, who's done all the preparatory work, Ariana for the technical support, and Angela Rodriguez, as well as our program manager, Ollie Wheatcroft. I want to thank them, and I want to thank you for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow at 1300.
I'm going to end the meeting now, but someone just asked me if they would be able to get a copy of the recording of the session. I think it will be available on YouTube, and I will also have a copy myself, so you can look out for that. We'll let you know.
Thanks, Ariana.